The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Power outages triggered by Tropical Storm Philippe forced school closures across the territory on Wednesday, but the challenges facing St. Croix Public Schools extend far beyond the weather. We'll have more. The community is mourning the loss of former Senator Alicia Chucky Hansen. Stay tuned as we bring you reflections from fellow lawmakers. The drama continues for the Virgin Islands Taxicab Commission. We'll have the latest from a Senate town hall meeting. Plus, the governor has approved a budget exceeding $1 billion for the fiscal year 2024. Coming up, we'll sit with Budget Director Jennifer O'Neill, Senator Donna Fred Gregory, Chairman of the Budget Finance Committee, and discuss information on the budget process. And later, our power panel, Gabrielle Carrard, Roosevelt David, and Senator Maurice James. They're here to analyze these top stories and more. Comes with the Territory starts now. Sunday to you. I'm Leslie Camise-Young, a Virgin Islands legend, a Crucian queen, a tireless advocate for the disadvantaged, and a giant of a woman. That's how Governor Albert Bryan Jr. described Alicia Chucky Hansen in a social media post Tuesday morning, as the community mourned the death of the former senator. A beloved and influential figure in Virgin Islands politics, Hansen passed away Monday night at the age of 70. Born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Hansen was first elected to the Virgin Islands legislature in 1986. She served 11 terms as a senator from the St. Croix district and held the record for the most votes in the district. Hansen was known for her distinct voice and her outspoken advocacy on behalf of the working class. Beyond politics, Hansen continued to stay involved in the community through her radio talk show, Keeping in Touch. Lawmakers took to the Senate floor throughout the week to pay tribute to Hansen.
Alicia Chucky Hansen is one of the icons of the territory.
She taught me many good things of being in office, standing up for the people.
She was a voice for the workers, the working class. None of us can deny that.
Whether it regarded housing, bus fares for the elderly, or reconnection fees with WAPA, Chucky was always concerned with the plight of the common man.
On the behalf of the 35th Legislature of the Virgin Islands, I'd just like to offer our sincere condolences to the family, loved ones, friends, and as well as all of the fans and supporters of Senator Hansen. This is a hard one, and certainly, we want her to rest in eternal peace.
The community is also mourning the loss of former Senator Lloyd Williams, who last served in the 16th legislature in 1985. Williams was also majority leader of the 15th legislature. His death was announced on Thursday, October 5th.
Good evening, taxi men and women.
Frustrations over dysfunction at the Virgin Islands Taxicab Commission spilled into a recent town hall meeting on St. Thomas. Taxicab drivers packed the Earl B. Oddly Legislative Hall on St. Thomas to gripe about long-standing problems within the Taxicab Commission, but no commission board members were present to hear their complaints. Taxicab drivers called on the governor to take action by removing ineffective board members. They also highlighted a major concern regarding the influx of so-called limousines into the industry.
Right now, our industry is being overrun by what they are calling the so-called limousine. And it wasn't done by the Taxicab Commission. It was actually done by this institution. What I have here in 2012, this bill was amended, and I'll go limousine, which are not considered automobile for hire and are exempt from the jurisdiction or application of any rules and regulation implemented by the Virgin Islands Taxi Cab Commission. This is an abomination upon the taxi industry.
Inclement weather caused by Tropical Storm Philippe forced the closure of all schools in the territory on Wednesday.
Justice! We gotta stand for our rights for our children!
But disruptions in the St. Croix district recently stemmed from job actions by teachers and protests held by students to call attention to ongoing maintenance issues at the school. The St. Croix chapter of the American Federation of Teachers protested on September 20th, and the Claude O. Marco, Pearl B. Larson, and Juanita Gardine schools to call attention to school conditions they claimed were hazardous to the health and safety of students and teachers. And several students joined the effort in the days that followed.
Consistently, we meet with the superintendent's office, with the commissioner, and yet they fail to take action on the issues, the critical issues affecting educators in this district. All right? Our brothers and sisters on St. Thomas got ACs. All the classrooms are outfitted with ACs in the district of St. Thomas, St. John. However, that is not the same on St. Croix, and that is a major issue. We are the proverbial stepchildren, apparently.
Protests are not new to me. I respect every teacher that thought that they needed to do that. We do have challenges. I'm not running away from the fact that we do. What I liked is that the students were taking a position, and accountability goes both ways. It's not just us holding people accountable, but us being held accountable too.
The fire at the Bavoni landfill on St. Thomas has finally been extinguished. According to Fire Director Darrell George, the fire was declared officially out on Wednesday, the 4th. The department released photos on social media showing the absence of fire and smoke. They said contractor A9 Trucking and Heavy Equipment was removing all hoses and equipment from the landfill. The firefight began on September 14th. The intensity of the aggressive fire and smoke conditions prompted Governor Albert Bryan Jr. to declare a state of emergency on September 18th. Governor Albert Bryan Jr. recently approved a budget of just over $1 billion for fiscal year 2024. This budget will support various agencies, including the Office of Inspector General, the Virgin Islands Hospital and Health Facilities, Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and the Waste Management Authority. The Senate Budget Committee held 23 days of budget hearings with over 62 government agencies and departments defending their budget requests for fiscal year 2024.
GVI's mandatory costs of $1.4 billion, that should be a B, in fiscal year 2024 have been funded in the proposed budget. The breakdown is as follows. General fund, $969 million. Other appropriated funds, $84.3 million. Federal funds, $334.9 million. And other non-appropriated funds of $35.2 million for a total budget of $1.42 billion. Today, we present an updated budget of $942,686,361 for the general fund, no change to all other categories, for a total proposed budget of $1,397,203,884. The budget update includes adjustments to our revenue projections, as well as to proposed expenditures for several departments and agencies. Our revenue projections have been updated for the upcoming fiscal year 2024 to $944,972,341. So the revenue projections are 944. We did not do the budget up to the 944. So the overall budget is 942.
So what are you proposing to do with that $2 million?
Nothing, because again, it's projections, and we really
we gotta do a balanced budget. Are you driving us crazy here?
Well, we typically
you can't dance with it. The projections have to support your expenses.
We've had 23 meetings, 64 plus agencies, 4 days of markup, which included markup days with committee chairs. So it's been a long process. The general fund budget totals $960 million. $193,760. And we have other funds that we've used to support our general fund budget, and that came up to $1,017,424,303. We continue to watch the revenues, follow the revenues, and in March, April of next year, we will do another scrub of the revenues to make a determination as to whether we are on task with generating the revenues that we have projected.
And joining me on set are the two ladies you just saw featured in that clip, Senator Donna Fred Gregory and Director Jennifer O'Neill, Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Ladies, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So the budget tends to be a very complex process, and we hear words like appropriations, projections, and it may stump the committee. So our objective here today is to break things down so that our viewers can understand from a very basic level, how does the budget function, how it comes about. So let's start with the various steps with the executive branch and the legislative branch. How do we end up with a budget? And being a former head of the department, the Department of Education, be on the executive level, let's start from within the department. How does the budget process start for you?
Well, basically, if my memory serves me correct, because I've been out of this for a while, somewhere about February, the OMB director would send to the departments and agencies, this is your ceiling for the upcoming budget year. And the departments and agencies would begin to look at their numbers, look at their expenses, and try their best to fit the expenses into the numbers as provided by the executive branch to the OMB director. When that is done, the Office of Management and Budget does their part, sends it to the chief executive of the territory, does that review, and then it comes down to the legislature by May 30th. And then that's when the dance starts. Yes.
And then when it gets to the legislature, what happens then?
We have the legislature conducts an entrance meeting, actually, with the OMB director, the government's financial team, to talk about the budget that has been presented, the revenues, the expenses, and all of the other associated funds. And we have a summer-long time where we meet with all the departments and agencies to talk about what's within their numbers, what's within their expenses, and decisions are made. And then we ask the OMB director and the financial team to come back in, because of course that happens in May. By then there are many things that has occurred in the government as far as revenues, as far as expenditures, challenges, you name it. So they come back in and we call that the exit meeting. And at that exit meeting, what we do is we hear again from the OMB director as it relates to, so what are your new projections, if any?
So let's ask the OMB director, what is that process from your perspective like during that period?
So it's very challenging, and actually since Senator Fred Gregory was there running the Department of Education, we've actually made the process longer. So we start in December into January, where we'll start sending out the ceilings based on our revenue projections. But once we submit that budget by May 30th, as she said, that dance starts during the summer. But we're continuously revising our budget numbers. We're looking at our revenues. We're seeing exactly where we are with our collections. By then, we have a much better understanding of all that has been collected from the April tax filing days, plus any other projects, et cetera, that's coming up. So we most always have a change to our revenue projections by the time we get to the budget wrap-up or the exit meeting, which is typically the last week in August, first week in September, so that it gives enough time for the legislative branch to finalize, do their markups, and then come up with a final budget to be sent back to the governor for his signature.
So one of the things that comes up all the time is fiscal year, and what is a fiscal year?
So our fiscal year is actually October 1st through September 30th of every year. We are just like the federal government. That is the federal government's fiscal year as well. So it's not a calendar year. It's not January to December. Our fiscal year is different. October 1st is when it starts and it ends September 30th.
And we just started our fiscal year. So when you talk about projections, How does the government know exactly how much money it's going to have for a budget year or for the fiscal year?
So we never really, obviously, know everything, but we use past collections. We look at our history. We use the last 5 years at minimum to look at what's happening and the trends that are occurring. Our revenues are cyclical. And there are certain times of the year when we get a lot of money in, like the April tax filing day, and then also in October, because a lot of people file for extensions, and the extension ends in October. So they'll be paying a lot of their taxes in October. So those typically are the two highest times for collection of revenues. We, of course, have in the tourist season, there's a lot of monies coming in then as well. So you have up through December through March-ish, you'll have a lot in terms of gross receipts and corporate income as well. Corporate income, most people do pay on a quarterly basis, so we are tracking that. We look at how all those things are playing out. Then we also factor in projects that are coming online or that may have started since last year, so we know how to do some projections based on what's happening with them, especially if they're government projects. We kind of know what we're going to expect from that because we take the 5% gross receipts, for instance, right off the top when we're making the payment. So from those things, we're able to have a good idea of what to expect in the upcoming fiscal year.
So we have viewers that probably have a set salary date. They know what their check's going to be, but we also have viewers that may work in the service industry. You know, you make certain tips that night, or taxi drivers, other people whose income fluctuates. So they could probably associate with the dynamics of the government estimating how much money that comes in. But tell me something, Senator. When there isn't enough money or there's discrepancies between what the executive branch is asking for and what is available, how is that resolved?
So we work very closely with the executive branch as it relates to the revenue projections. And there are times when we see differences, so we have those conversations and we come to a happy medium. This year in particular, because of what we saw in FY23, or what we're seeing in FY23, we are seeing that the revenues are down, and the projections that were made this fiscal year, which is 23, because we're still in September, right? So when those revenues were projected, they were projected a little higher because they were projected based on the projects, the anticipated projects coming into the territory. So we had the conversation. So this year we recognize that we're going to see those projects in FY24. So you know, we had the conversations about, so what are those projects and what are we seeing those projects will generate as it relates to gross receipt taxes and personal income taxes. So we made those decisions based on that. And if we're still coming up short, we know that we have challenges. We know that we have challenges with our rum cover over dollars. So a lot of our expenses and our obligations that were tied to our rum cover over are now being placed on our general fund. So we are fortunate this period of this time because we have ARPA dollars. So in those conversations, we were very honest and transparent with our conversations, both on the executive branch and on the legislative branch. And we talked about the need for us to backfill our budget in order to ensure that we are able to provide a budget that's balanced. But our hope is to review the budget in the upcoming year, sometime in, I would say, March, April, to look at our revenues to determine whether or not we're going to truly need to backfill our budget.
Okay, so what is the largest part of the government of the Virgin Islands budget?
The Department of Education, and that's about 172 to 74 million.
And which department has the smallest budget?
That's a good question. I would say
Agriculture,
Taxi Cab Commission.
OCB.
Those small
collective
agencies.
bargaining, or Veterans Affairs, probably your two smallest.
So a lot of people think that when they hear these numbers, okay, the budget of the government of the Virgin Islands total is 1.3 whatever million. They think that all that money is sitting in a bank account somewhere. Is that true?
No, it's not.
Okay, I just want, because a lot of people are under that impression. They think that money is just there and we're taking away from it. So we explained the dynamics of how money comes in and money flows, and I think people that run a household budget can associate with that. But what happens if money is not spent in a department?
So if it's not spent, that's something that the OMB director and her team, the Department of Finance commissioner, at the end of each fiscal year, they should actually be truing up the final numbers the final numbers are usually unaudited numbers. And then when the audit comes in, then you're able to see if there was, I'm going to say money left on the table, because I'm not going to, I don't believe, based on what I've looked at in the prior years, that we've overspent our budget, because the OMB directors over the years, including Ms. O'Neill here, has done an excellent job of, reducing allotments if necessary. So they have a responsibility to look at the revenues and really make a decision as to whether or not they can release those allotments based on the revenues.
So, Director O'Neill, what can the governor do to the budget once it's sent from the legislature up to him for approval?
So the governor has the authority to line item veto anything within the budget that he may not agree with, or if there are errors, he will, point them out. Typically, there isn't much that we do to the budget once it's sent, because we know we can always go back and amend as necessary. So typically, it's not vetoed. If there's a line item veto, it might be, as was the case for FY24, there may be one or two things that were listed twice. So you just remove the extra one. But outside of that, there really were no, or would be no line item vetoes of the budget bills.
As multiple chair of the Finance Committee and as OMB director, how accurate would you say what is passed by law and what actually happens with government spending? How do they line up? Now you were saying we can't dance about this. We got to have it accurate. How accurate is spending really true to what we read in the budget of the government of the Virgin Islands?
So I've looked at it, and typically what I've seen is over the past, I would say 5 years, our revenues come in between 700 plus to 830 million. And I'm just speaking direct to our general fund and our other funds that, make up our budget. And I'm seeing a reduction in what we project as far as a over projection. But we over project, but what I will say is we don't overspend, because what I'm seeing is the OMB director issuing the allotments monthly and really managing and looking at the revenues. That's why there's a government financial team. So the financial team is really responsible for ensuring that they're not overspending the budget. And we have some agencies that have challenges, like our police department, where there's lots of overtime.
And unexpected criminals. There's no way to, for instance, when we arrest someone, we incarcerate someone, we have to spend that money. And that was going to be one of my questions about what do we mandatory have to spend on and discretionary spending? Like, what's the difference there? I'll let you handle that question, Director.
So there are a lot of things that pop up. For instance, the fire that's been burning for some time. That's clearly not budgeted. It popped up, and those are costs now that have to be paid. So those are things that we would have to go back to the legislature for and get a new appropriation to handle those costs that were outside of the budget. But there isn't much in the way of discretionary spending, as even though people may think differently. It's really, the bulk of the budget is personnel. You really don't have a lot of other things that you can do, because personnel takes the bulk of it. I think it covers at least 60% of the budget. And of course, as you know, we've been having a lot of increases to salaries, new union negotiations happening, new wage agreements. So with that increase in personnel really leaves a lot less for any discretionary spending. So, it's...
Well, last words, ladies, because believe it or not, our segment's always almost up. So I'm going to give you a few seconds, and Director O'Neill.
Well, what I'll say about discretionary spending is, you always have what you call pork barrel. So that's where you could really decide whether or not you're going to release those dollars or not. And pork barrel is, we have a lot of nonprofits, et cetera, that come to the government and ask for resources, because of course government can't do everything, so they provide support as well. So that would be where you would see more of that discretionary spending going, non-discretionary rather, spending going on in our budget. But for the most part, the budget is very tight. It's really tied to the government and agencies and how you are able to provide those resources to provide services to the people of the Virgin Islands.
Director O'Neill, just as a wrap-up final word, give us the overall numbers for this year's budget for the government of the Virgin Islands.
So the general fund budget is roughly about $958 million. Overall total, including federal grants, is roughly $1.3 billion, or a little over $1.3 billion in total for fiscal year 24. Of course, as the Senator said, we will be reviewing continuously on our revenues. We are going to backfill, if necessary, with our revenue loss from the American Rescue Plan Act funding that we have. But outside of that, we are going to push. We encourage everybody to continue to pay your bills. You know, the largest source of government revenues is individual income taxes. So we need you to go ahead and file and pay, because that is how government runs. It's by your collections.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for joining us and trying to simplify this very complex topic. Thank you both for coming today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.
Here are those final numbers again. The general fund budget for fiscal year 2024 adopted by the Virgin Islands Legislature was $960,193,760. Governor Bryan made some adjustments via line item vetoes of $2,446,020, ultimately approving a general fund budget of $957,747,740. Lawmakers said the budget process went relatively smoothly, all but for one of the agencies, the over 60 agencies who came before the Senate Finance Committee, and that was the Taxi Cab Commission.
Again, because of the strain, and me by myself, I would not be able to continue with this in its entirety to here present my testimony and respond to questions.
Okay. All right, so colleagues, we heard it from the executive director. We've been at this is our second time we've been at this. The last time the chair could not get her screen on is always something. We do have some legislation around our pleasure as to how we choose to deal with the Taxi Commission moving forward, but today is not the day for us to discuss that. So it's really about how do we move forward with the Taxi Cab Commission. So I am going to adjourn the meeting today and allow, we need to have a conversation with your board chair and company so we could figure out where we're going with Taxi Cab Commission. And we actually probably need to have a conversation with the governor of the Virgin Islands, because I believe that's where we're at with this. We are at our wit's end with the Taxi Cab Commission.
Joining me on the set to discuss the Taxi Cab Commission and all the other issues of the day is our power panel. Senator Maurice James is the chairwoman of the Senate Committee on Education and Workforce Development. Thank you for coming. Gabrielle Carrard is a social media content creator, culture bearer, and Virgin Islands historian. Welcome. And former Senator Roosevelt David, who served 5 terms undefeated in the Virgin Islands Legislature before moving back to the private sector. Thank you for joining me, Roosevelt.
Pleasure.
Now, we're going to get started with the Taxi Cab Commission. Lots of contention. There's competition. Limousines and other vehicles are now, serving aspects of the community where there's an obvious need. And with the innovations in taxi service across the world, with the introduction of Uber, Lyft, and other rideshare services, competition is tight right now. Have you been paying attention to what's been going on, and did you get a chance to check out the town hall meetings that they've been having?
Absolutely, I have, and what's become quite evident to me is that there seems to be a general lack of checks and balances in ensuring that the things that need to get done are being done, especially by the board members. And it's also quite evident that this has been issues that have compounded on top of each other for years. Like, for instance, the Taxi Cab Commission does not have their records digitized. And so in April, when they had to shut down their buildings, the basic functions of the office could not take place. And largely leaving people inaccessible to being able to renew their licenses and paying the fees so they could be up to date. And what became I was acutely aware of the fact that we have a real serious problem with the board members. And I don't feel like this is the only board that we see a lot of the same characteristics and behaviors. So one of the things that was noted was that when Senator Donna Fred Gregory came together on May 9th of this year to meet with the board to see how they can start to address some of the issues, figure out why the building was closed, only one board member showed up. And then we saw a similar situation in the most recent town hall where no board member showed up. And it feels very disingenuous for our local community and the people that are being directly served, by this board, because it's just like they get paid, they're not volunteer board members.
Correct. Rosa, let me ask you something. What you see happening, this discord that's happening, board members not showing up to hearings even, and the fact that they're saying regulations are not being equally applied across the board. How do you think that fares for the future of the taxi industry in the territory?
Well, the whole situation, I've got to say, is troubling to me. And I say this because at one point in time, I was the chairman of the Taxi Commission. And people have got to be responsible. And when you take a position, being on a board, you expect to show up to form a quorum. Policies are put in place, rules and regulations, and people must be held accountable. That's what we did when I was chairman of the Taxi Commission. I'm not seeing this now. And it's so hard to find real, good, committed people to be on boards and commissions. But something has to be done. I'm troubled by this, and there certainly have to be changes because the taxi industry is huge. Yes. Local industry is huge, and it makes a significant contribution to the economy. So we can't waste time around this. We've got to address it immediately.
St. Croix doesn't necessarily have this melee going on with the competition. Okay, it's not as intense because of the dollars generated in the industry, as Roosevelt alluded to. But from a regulatory perspective and a legislative perspective, what do you think can be done? What suggestions would you have to help alleviate the issues that we're seeing now?
Well, you're right that St. Croix doesn't have the same issues because we don't have as many customers.
Correct.
I mean, that's the bottom line. I also looked at the hearing, the town hall meeting that was held, and there are laws that actually need to be reviewed, and we have to determine whether or not they're relevant in these times. I wanted to say this. When someone serves on a board, you have to be interested and you have to care.
Absolutely.
And that came loud and clear to me when they didn't show up, not even one.
Yeah.
And so at this point, you have to look at the board members and really ask them, do you really want to serve? Because service is showing up and doing the work. So that's something that I think the governor needs to look at with regard to the members that now serve on the board and whether or not they need to be replaced.
The fact of the matter is taxiing in the Virgin Islands, especially in this district, is extremely lucrative. Mm-hmm. And those competitions for those dollars, and because it's a cash industry, you don't have taxes, FICA, Medicare coming out of your pay every day. It seems to be very attractive to individuals. So the competition for the cash is what we're seeing here. But my concern has always been service to the community. It seems to have evolved into a industry that serves our guests, but it doesn't serve locals as well as it should. What do you think, I'm gonna go back to you, Gabrielle, could happen to help alleviate that? And do you foresee in the future, with expansion of technology, the finalization of the GIS mapping project with Lieutenant Governor's office, rideshare companies, and the competition getting even tighter for the customers that are out there?
Well, first and foremost, it goes back to what I initially said was it feels like there's no system of checks and balances. And so we need to find ways to put some sort of protocol in place that ensures that the people that are stepping into these board positions are in fact doing what they're supposed to do. I thought something that was really interesting that came through in the May 9th meeting that the senator had with the one board member that ended up showing up is that it was revealed that there may have been at least 5 board members on the board who were up for re-election, but no election had been scheduled. And so they're sitting on a board that, you know, they may not properly be supposed to be sitting on the board. And I think that we have a lot of complex issues here in our territory, and there are things that we could mitigate, and that's something that seems pretty simple and easy to deal with.
We're going to move along to a big topic, education and the conditions of our schools. If I get another notice saying that a school on St. Croix is closed today, I am going to lose it. Senator, maintenance in our schools have been a perennial issue. But this year, for whatever reason, it seems like all the schools deciding they acting up at one time. What is happening?
Well, when you have to start with the fact that you should not be operating on breakdown maintenance, which is what we've been doing for years. We wait until something is broken and then we fix it. We have to do preventative maintenance. And this year, now as a new member of the legislature, I was very happy to join Senator Fred Gregory in sponsoring the Bureau of School Construction and Maintenance, because prior to this, the Education Commissioner was the one responsible for doing that alongside having to deal with instruction and making sure that students are meeting the scores that they should, that teachers are credentialed. Those are things that she should be focused on, but not on maintenance and repair and construction. So what has happened this year, finally, is that it has passed. And so hopefully we're going to see a director chosen. I understand that they're supposed to be advertising or have advertised so far. But think about it. $2 million per year for all these years for the entire territory was just foolish. And there was no way, even if we didn't have a bureau, for the people who were in charge of repairing and maintaining the schools could do that on $2 million. So if you have a house, eventually, you know, it's going to deteriorate, right? And that's what has happened. And then on St. Croix, you know, a lot of the schools are very, I guess on St. Thomas they are too. I don't know the comparison, but our schools are, some of them are over 50 years old.
Absolutely.
And sooner or later this was going to happen. And this year it did.
And Roosevelt, you know, in addition to the job action on St. Croix by the St. Croix Federation of Teachers, we saw students get involved for the first time in years. And so, you know, as for students to get involved in these protests, things had to be pretty bad. What's your take on that?
Well, it's not a pretty sight. And I like the legislation that Senator Donna Fred had brought forward, that you're going to give the responsibility to maintaining the school a separate entity and not depend on the Commissioner of Education to get this done. Now, I much prefer to see that students are in the classroom. I believe that good faith negotiations, those are good. And the end result would be that what needed to be fixed will be fixed. But every day that a student is not in the classroom, instructional
the learning loss,
that's what it's learning loss is
yeah,
there.
Significant.
And how do you compete with the rest of the world if you're not in school?
And that's a great point that you bring up. And Gabrielle, I was going to actually talk about learning loss, because if you look at, for instance, the last 7 years in the territory, between the storms, COVID, and now these everyday seemingly, you know, stoppages in education, our students have incurred a tremendous amount of learning loss. What does that mean for us in years to come? Because those days that they're missing months, and it's going to be significant. And our standardized test scores are showing us that our students, a lot of them are below grade level in testing in math, science, and reading. So what does that mean for the job market, opportunities, and most importantly, the social issues that come about as a result?
Well, I think that I was a former teacher, and it was quite evident even prior to the hurricanes that we have a literacy problem here in the Virgin Islands. And of course, the hurricanes and COVID has compounded that issue. And further than that, I think a lot of children go to school and they already feel defeated at the moment that they put their foot down on that school campus. A lot of children, if you cannot read, it's very difficult for you to understand any subject outside of reading. And so the responsibility on us, and unfortunately the weight falls on the backs of the teachers to be able to make up the gap. But statistics will tell you that the most efficient teacher can only make up a year and a half of learning loss for a student, which seems monumental. But when we have so many students that are in the 6th grade reading on a 2nd grade level, statistics show that these children will never catch up. And unfortunately, we also have a large amount of kindergartners that have entered the schools and are already behind. They can't hold a pencil. They don't have fine motor skills. And so the basic skills that they need to set them up for just basic kindergarten success, they don't have. And statistics, again, will show that the children that come into kindergarten and are not ready to go into kindergarten never actually catch up. And so the gap widens. These children will eventually become adults and they will go into the world if they end up finishing high school, and their job prospects will be very limited.
You know, back in 2007, I attended a national governors conference, and I listened to the governor of Oklahoma say that they determine how many prison cells to build based on standardized test scores of 3rd graders. And that was chilling. From a social point of view and even from a legislative point of view, how do we begin to turn get around the corner on education once again? Because you look at historically Virgin Islanders like Valdemar Hill, Lionel Roberts, Claude O'Marco, and others that were Eulalie Rivera, big educators. Education was, you know, we might not have been wealthy from an economic point of view, but education was first. And I think back to the 1971 decision to open our public schools to the immigrants in the territory and how our education system was at one point overloaded. I still don't think we have fully recovered from that. It was the right decision that Judge Christian made, but we have not systematically been able to recover from that. How do we, you know, get around the corner on education once again?
Well, one of the things that I am focusing on, and I'm hoping that I can see it pass in this legislature, is early childhood care and education. And that's because I was glad that Gabrielle said about that students are not ready when they enter kindergarten. And that's because from the time you are born, 90% of your brain cells really are developed before, I think it's like almost a year. I can't remember the exact statistics. So a lot of children, and one of the things we're ignoring is that on St. Croix for sure, I know that 30% of our children are living below the poverty level. Yeah. So you think about how we then as a society have to bring all these social services to parents who from the time their child is born need help. They need help with dental care. They need help with food. There's
nutrition.
Food insecurity. I was a teacher also, and I volunteered at Juanita Gardine. And when I went in, little 1st grade students, and I was in the military at the time, one young lady came up to me and said to me, "I'm hungry." Wow. And that's just a fact of their lives. That's how they're living now. So if we develop a early child care and education system where you have the Department of Health, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, all join in one, in synergy, which is something I've been talking about. For too long, we've had all of them operating in silos. And so if a child is needing help in for example, human services, that means it's affecting their education, it's affecting their health. So all those departments have to coordinate, collaborate, and I recently had a hearing, and I already see that the testifiers, Lutheran Social Services, Health, Education, they all see the gaps.
Yeah.
And so we're going to try to fill those.
We talked about the student protests. At the same time, there was a march on Government Hill. The United Steelworkers are now looking for a new contract. Teachers are unhappy. It seems like so much going on at one time. What's your take on what the steelworkers are looking for, and have you been paying attention to that issue?
I have been their union leaders, their union members, and of course they're looking for their contract. But you've seen with this administration over and over how contracts have been filled, signed off on, and the responsibility has never been shirked. As you could see in the last budget there, $25 million had gone in there to pay retirees retroactive monies. So indeed, I think that they're exercising their right going out there, but I believe that those contracts are going to be fulfilled.
Well, we have had rolling power outages that got people, I can't even use the word on television. People are upset, and we're talking about financial losses in the territory. People are unable, your children home, no power. It's just a maddening situation. We've had significant investments. And I've heard Governor Bryan say that before he leaves office, his goal is to fix WAPA. I'm going to start with you, Gabrielle. You think WAPA is actually fixable at this point?
I think that WAPA is very top heavy. I think that there is very limited systems of checks and balances. And I think that I think that the agency would have to work very hard to rebuild public trust. There's just a lot of inefficiency, I'll say. And I think that we, as Virgin Islanders, when we categorize our top problems, WAPA falls as one of the top. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the big reasons why there's so much brain drain that's happening here, why so many people are leaving. The prices are some of the highest in the Western Hemisphere.
It affects everything.
In the Caribbean, and it's just like when you're getting subpar service, it almost feels like they don't care. And so they're able to make their $100,000 plus salaries, and they get to own the generators, which is a place of privilege. And it's a place of privilege to be able to go home and you have your running water and you this, that, and the other. And when you think about how much people are living in poverty in the Virgin Islands and how much people are truly suffering, you have elders who have insulin that they can't keep cool. You have mothers with newborn babies who are hot and miserable and getting rashes because of the heat.
Correct.
Especially in a time where we're experiencing one of the hottest summers ever recorded in the Virgin Islands. And so I think that a lot would have to be done and a lot of hard questions would have to be asked, but my highest suggestion would be an audit. An audit needs to happen, a real audit in which we can identify what's happening, because we've lost money there. $2 million went missing arbitrarily a couple years ago, and we still haven't, as a public, heard information on that.
Well, actually, to WAPA's credit, they did get that money refunded to them. Their insurer did refund them. But Roosevelt, to the points that Gabrielle made, this issue has been with us now for decades. It's like my grandmother would say, since Rock of Ages was a pebble, okay? We've made investments in Agreco generators, Wärtsilä generators, but it just doesn't seem to be coming together. We've had promises of propane being the answer, and the spending. And quite frankly, Gabrielle, to your point, in addition to an audit, I think people should go to jail. Mm-hmm. How does Governor Bryan or this administration stay true to their word to actually fix WAPA? What is the fix? Is it a restructuring? Is it that we look to alternative energy sources and go headlong into that? What is the fix?
WAPA is fixable. Right now, as we speak, hundreds of millions of dollars are being invested in solar farms on St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. John. And what this does in the end, that it produces power, energy, selling to WAPA at 13 cents per kilowatt hour. That reduces the cost of electricity significantly, that WAPA could sell now to the public at a much lower rate. But you said going back decades, that's correct. And it's pathetic. And sometimes we have to save our people from themselves.
Yes.
And I believe, as Governor Turnbull did, believe in public-private partnership. For example, Southern Energy and WAPA were supposed to be into a partnership where we were going to be getting $100 million up front, and we were going to be owners of that plant at 25% ownership. But here the interesting part here. With only 25% ownership, you still had the controlling say in it. You had veto power because Southern Energy couldn't do anything unless the Virgin Islands government gave the approval.
I remember that.
So,
that was during.
I'm saying to you, you got to save the people from themselves.
But we voted that down, and I remember.
I was in the Senate. I voted for it.
I remember being in support of the Southern
I
Energy
supported
deal,
it
and
big
a lot
time.
of people now that was all knows back then. Well, we should have taken the deal.
They
It's a little bit too
offered
late.
us stability, lower rates, ownership, $100 million. We would have been much better off today than we were then, and we wouldn't have been having this quarrel today at all.
Well, Senator, I'm sure you remember back in the day when the Southern Energy deal was potentially on the table for us. But we can't cry over spilled milk, and I'd say not even God changes the past. So the past is the past. But moving forward, do you think that this administration, or any administration for that fact, can really get a hold on WAPA and make the fixes that need to be done?
I agree with Roosevelt, Senator David, that it is fixable. I also want to say that we, in the legislature, we passed, we overrode the legislation that the governor vetoed with respect to giving the Inspector General funds to do an audit. But you know, at the same time, that's also in the past, and doing an audit doesn't actually fix the structure, the power generation. It doesn't do that. I also agree with Roosevelt that I think we're going to see changes with solar farms, with renewable energy. The one thing that I smiled when he said public-private partnerships is because I also have legislation dealing with that, because I think our people are not, number one, comfortable, or I should say they don't trust the idea of us somehow getting into partnership with the private sector. They don't. I thought it was interesting and in a sense ahead of time, and not really ahead of time because other jurisdictions have P3 agreements in place, that Port Authority is doing that and leading the way in showing that it can happen. So I think though, by giving them a comfort level in terms of legislation and saying, okay, if we enter into P3 agreements, this is what we want. And this is what we want to ensure that the public interest is protected. And that's what my legislation aims to do, to at least educate them and make them feel comfortable enough to know we're not going to lose.
That's good to hear. I wish we could get into what a P3 agreement is, but we only have a few minutes left, believe it or not. Our time together is drawing to an end. Recently, we have had the passing of some significant political figures in the territory. We'll start with former Senator Hugo Dennis, former Senator George Goodwin, recently the passing of Alicia Chucky Hansen, which we mentioned in the show, who was a political giant. And also we learned right after about the passing of former Senator Lloyd Williams. Roosevelt, I'm gonna start with you, having served with a few of those individuals. Just very briefly, give us some reflections on your time with them.
I served with Chucky Hansen. I called her the Chuck for 5 terms. We were always on the opposite side. But when she gave you her word, it was her bond. And she was a warrior for the people. She fought for the downtrodden, and she would open doors for anybody as long as it is in the best interest of the people of the Virgin Islands. But I want to touch, I never served with Lloyd Williams, but I went to the legislature. I always thought he was a man ahead of his time. In 1978, he brought forth the taxi medallion legislation. And I went to the legislature and testified on its behalf as a banker, because I saw that it was going to be a tremendous asset going down the road for the taxi drivers. They cursed me all over the place, but today they're benefiting in a big way. So I testified on his behalf.
Wow.
And since then,
look where we've come.
I have worked with him
Yeah.
as we as realtors, we have done real estate deals together. And this morning when I heard that he passed on, it really saddened me very much. But both those senators contributed significantly to the economy of the Virgin Islands and the upliftment, the enhancement of the people of the Virgin Islands.
We have just a few minutes left. I know you're the youngest member of the panel. Any memories growing up of, especially Senator Hansen, I'm sure you have?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to speak into the fact that it's always, as a young female Virgin Islander, it's always nice to see women step into the political arena, especially since historically it's always been male dominant. And not even see her step into the political arena, but she was a force to be reckoned with. And I remember as a child, you know, seeing newspaper articles come out or even overhearing the Senate hearings on the radio. And she did not cow to nobody.
Yeah.
And that was quite evident. She was very strong in her convictions.
From the Big Island of St. Croix, I'm sure you have had several interactions with the senator. Let's reflect on a few of those.
Well, first of all, I was not in the legislature, so I met her most often when her husband was a veteran, and I served in the military, and so I met her a number of times at veterans' balls. And I reflect on the last one because I thought that when I looked at her, I saw her strength, but I also saw her love for her husband and her family. And when we think, you know, we talk about millennials nowadays, but if you think about how old she was when she first got elected, she was a millennial, if we call that, you know, in terms of the age. And I always looked at her as, again, for me, a woman who was able to balance work and family and do it successfully and with such strength and power. And I always admired her. A couple of times she gave me some advice on the side that I appreciated. One time, as a matter of fact, I ran in '88 and I lost, and I was very happy I lost because I then focused on my family. And I always said, boy, she's good to continue doing this with a family. And she just said to me, you know, stay focused and go forward.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us on the first and inaugural version of Comes with the Territory. I appreciate you all for joining us. And to the viewers, continue to view us here on WTJX on Sundays. It's going to be just like this with power panels galore. I'm Leslie Camis Young. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.